Good evening. Good evening, and welcome to the YWCA Toronto and Ryerson University present the Walrus Talks Women of Distinction. I'm Helen Burstyn. I'm chair of the Walrus Board of Directors, and we are thrilled to be here on the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the New Credit. There is a rich history of sharing conversation here, and it's great to be with you in the lovely Jane Mallett Theatre to continue having Canadian conversations about issues that matter. The Walrus recognizes that Canada's conversation is complex and necessary for the health of our country, and so we spark conversations through fact-based journalism in the Walrus magazine and daily at thewalrus.ca. Also by publishing the Walrus books and in rooms like this from coast to coast to coast. At the Walrus Talks and the Walrus Leadership Dinners, no matter where the walrus is or how it is consumed, we embrace our commitment to be independent and to bring together interesting and interested people who care about issues that matter. Hands up if you read The Walrus. Let's check the room here. Great, great. Hands up if you have attended the Walrus Talks before. Okay, it looks like a number of you have, and welcome back to those who have. And hands up if you are new to the Walrus Talks. So okay, hands up. All right, let's welcome all the new people. There's no way we could do the work that we do without our partners, and tonight we are thrilled to partner with two organizations close to my heart, the YWCA Toronto and Ryerson University. For the past 40 years, the YWCA has celebrated remarkable women who are changing the lives of women and girls through the Women of Distinction Awards. I'm pleased to be among this group of trailblazers and role models, and I received that distinction in 2010, and tonight we are delighted to hear from 7 other esteemed Women of Distinction alumni. To tell us more, please welcome YWCA Toronto CEO Heather Macgregor. Heather?
Thank you, Helen. I am really thrilled to be here this evening, and I'm also thrilled to be able to tell you that YWCA Toronto has championed women since 1873. It is pretty remarkable, and this evening you're going to hear from 7 of our YWCA Toronto Women of Distinction, and I know that you will be fascinated, amused, perhaps shocked at what they have to say, and I'm really, really looking forward to it. Just so that you know, let me just give you a very small taste of what we do at the YWCA. And since the beginning, our 2 biggest programs have been housing and employment, and they still are today. So we have, for instance, in housing, we have a range of housing options for women, from emergency shelter for single homeless women, to emergency shelter for women and children fleeing violence, to permanent housing, permanent affordable housing. We have about 550 apartment units for single women and for women with children. We also have about 12 employment programs serving a whole range of women who are representative of women across our city, from newcomers and therefore we have English classes, to classes that we have to get women into the trades so that they can, instead of working in little jobs that don't pay them very much, where they can actually join unions and have a good living. So we have many programs at about 12 sites across the city. So I encourage you to find out more about us. I also encourage you this year to come to our Women of Distinction Awards, which is May the 28th. And you'll see tonight, when you hear these 7 women, how wonderful that awards are. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Heather, and thanks to everyone at YWCA Toronto and Ryerson for your support tonight. So here is how the Walrus Talks works. Each talker has 7 minutes, as you've heard. Each will come up and introduce herself. Please follow along in the program. The speaker order is on one side and their bios are on the other side. You will hear 7 talkers for 7 minutes each in a row. And once your head is full of ideas, we will have lots to talk about afterwards in the post-talks reception. And you're all invited to that. Just before I let our talkers get underway, I'd like to thank each in advance. So, thank you to journalist, author, and human rights activist Sally Armstrong, philanthropist and chair of the Margaret and Wallace McCain Family Foundation, the Honorable Margaret McCain, Chancellor of Ryerson University, Janice Fukakusa, Professor and Canadian Research Chair of Functional Cardiovascular Tissue Engineering, Milica Radisic, educator, public servant, and community advocate Zanana Akande, founder and president of SheIS and founding commissioner of the Canadian Women's Hockey League, Brenda Andress, and investigative reporter Connie Walker. Thank you for coming. Let's get to it.
My name is Sally Armstrong. I have something to tell you. There's a reason that women have been sidelined, oppressed, treated as less able than men. And I found that reason when I was researching the Massey lectures this year called Power Shift, the Longest Revolution. You see, the early research that was done on the Stone Age, the Pleistocene, the Paleolithic, was done by anthropologists and archaeologists, and they were all men. Well, that was okay, but the trouble is they only looked at men. They left the women out. So it's pretty hard to be a CEO or a leader or smart or strategic or anything else if you're not even in the picture. And that's what happened. But now the archaeologists and anthropologists are also women, as well as young anthropologists and archaeologists, and they have reopened the file. And here's what they found. Remember that old expression, man the hunter? It's bogus. There is not a shred of evidence to say that she wasn't hunting right beside him. In fact, they also discovered that gender equality was the order of the day until about 10,000 years ago. It was during the agriculture era, you know, when there was a surplus of food, that'll do it. But when they had enough food that they could think ahead, what did they think of? They thought, we need more laborers. And so the men acquired the pregnant women to get those extra laborers. And that indeed was the birth of patriarchy. But it's fair to say that what patriarchy didn't complete, religion did. As Amanda Foreman, the British historian, says, the hard truth is that in almost every civilization, women have been deemed the secondary sex. It's an idea that has become so ingrained, it's been written into history as a biological truth. Don't we know it? So, we were left out, but you know what? We're still left out. As we have found out, women were left out of medical research. The researchers didn't want to include women because our menstrual cycles would get in the way of their research, for heaven's sakes. But then when they found out that a woman experiencing a heart attack or a stroke has different symptoms and requires different treatment, well, then they got into including us in their research. It was Caroline Criado Perez who wrote that great book, The Invisible Woman, and she said, even the crash test dummy is a man. So that's true. He's bigger and he's heavier than a woman, and he sits farther back in the seat and away from the wheel. So all that money and time spent on vehicle safety, as it turns out, was good for men, not so much for women. In fact, there are consequences. Women are hurt in an accident 47% more often than men, and women die in vehicle accidents 17% more often than men. Well, how about this? Medical research did start including us, and they were doing research on women with PMS and severe menstrual cramps. Bring it on. And they were using a drug called, what was that drug called? I'll come back to that. They were using a drug that drove blood to the region, and it was really working. The women in the research were reporting terrific results. And then at a meeting, a researcher said, drives blood to the region? What about erectile dysfunction? Would that work? And bingo, the little blue pill came into action, and Viagra was a runaway success, which is probably a wonderful thing, except they canceled the rest of the research on PMS and menstrual cramps. Why? Because it was not deemed to be a public health problem. Well, go figure. But my favorite story, my favorite one, is about last year, just March the 29th, 2019. Remember, there was going to be an all-women spacewalk. 2 women at NASA organizing the show and 2 women astronauts hanging outside the space capsule fixing probably the Canadarm. And 1 hour before they were to launch, they found out they only had 1 suit that fit a woman. 2019. So they had to scrub it. And a man went out on that walk with the other woman, because hanging 322 kilometers above the earth for 6 hours in clothes that don't fit is probably a really bad idea. As you know, that wrong was righted a few weeks ago when they managed to stitch up a suit that would fit a woman astronaut. But you know, leaving women out or denying equality rights is costing a fortune. We know that corporations that have women on the board or women in management are simply making more money than corporations that don't. But there are invariably people who don't see this for what it's worth. For example, there's a television host called Tucker Carlson of Fox News. And this is what he said the other night to his audience. Studies have shown that when men make less money than women, women generally don't want to marry them. He went on to say, this causes a drop in marriage, a spike in out-of-wedlock birth, and all the familiar disasters that follow: more drug and alcohol abuse, higher incarceration rates, fewer families formed in the next generation. And then he said, this is not propaganda. This is social science. Well, I wonder where that man gets his science from. I also wonder how dumb he thinks his viewers are. But what is it about men like Tucker Carlson that makes them want to say women don't belong here, in the workforce, in the C-suite, in the boardroom? Today, that thinking is simply out of step. With the advent of social media in 2012, everything changed. The 4th wave of the women's movement came along, and with it, we had liftoff. This is about intersectionality. This is about the inclusion of all the women at last. This is about Indigenous women being included, and women of color, and LGBTQ, and poor women, and disabled women, and all the women, because that's the way we can get to the finish line. This was the birth of #feminism, #MeToo, and Time's Up. And you know, for social innovators, the holy grail is finding out which one of these is really going to stay fixed. And they found out that because of the way Me Too works, which is like a current, it's open, participatory, peer-driven, it uploads, it distributes, it's most forceful when it surges. It is the one they say will last. And that's what's driving the bus for change today. Women have changed the laws, written their way into constitutions, and challenged governments all over the world. The last barrier for equality is men. It's foolish to suggest that women are better or smarter or more informed than men. What's true is this: women know different. With both of us at the table, we double the ideas, the vision, and the solutions to our problems, and it's time, as the Walrus said, for women and men to walk together. Thank you.
My name is Margaret McCain, and I want to talk to you about philanthropy. Philanthropy is defined as a love of humanity with action to promote and advance the well-being of one's community and society. Women have been a force in philanthropy as far back in history as there are records. The hearts and hands of women have created charities worldwide, and Canada is no exception. Canadian women have been a force behind the founding of multiple charities: shelters, schools, soup kitchens, aid organizations, and many more. The Child Development Institute in Toronto is a very successful, multifaceted agency serving children and families. It began in 1909 as the Creche, Child and Family Service, founded by two Anglican women, Mary Benton and Gertrude Toll. It was a place where working women could leave their babies. Imagine this, a daycare in 1909, a time when the prevailing culture expected women to stay home and care for their babies. The creche eventually added a milk program, an employment program, and another to learn about the psychology of early childhood in 1909. What a vision. These two women were typical of the female philanthropists of their day, addressing an urgent need, working hard to raise the money to provide the services. Women in their day, and up to the 21st century, did not have the earning power to generate their own wealth. They were dependent on generous husbands or on inherited wealth from their fathers or husbands. Rarely did husbands give their wives a voice in decisions about family philanthropy. Men made the money, and they decided where it would go. I was one of the fortunate few whose husbands gave their wives the checkbook. Sometimes, but rarely, women broke with the norm and were able to shape their own philanthropy. Helen LaKelly Hunt is an American woman who has had an enormous influence on Canadian women philanthropists. Her father was a silver magnate in Dallas, Texas. He is thought to be the prototype for Jock Ewing of the TV show Dallas. Helen and her sister led the typical Dallas life for wealthy women of her day. Luxury, unlimited bank accounts, frequent shopping trips to Neiman Marcus. She described her life this way. The king was in the counting house, counting out his money. The queen was in the parlor, eating bread and honey. But Helen and her sister didn't like honey, nor did they like the life that money gave them. So they took their share and left. Something more meaningful was of interest to them. So they founded the Sisters Fund to support women's charities. And then they began an organization called Women Moving Millions to encourage women of means to act in support of women's needs. And this has had an enormous influence on women in Canada, including me. Although until recently, women have been dependent on a generous husband or inherited wealth, they have done amazing things. Why and how? Because women care. Margot Franson of the Body Shop Canada explains it this way. I put my heart in my checkbook, and my checkbook in my heart. And Margot has been a driving force in initiatives focused on family violence and the trafficking of women and girls. Carol Newell has been an inspiration to those of us who have inherited wealth. She has demonstrated how to handle it wisely. An American woman who fell in love with British Columbia, she chose to move there permanently. And when her mother died, she found herself with a lot of money. She didn't know how to handle it. She didn't really know what to do with it, and didn't particularly want to. But she was very wise. She hired a very competent team who eventually helped her money grow to over $100 million. First, she established a foundation whose mission was solely on her passion to protect the environment and ecology of British Columbia. Then she added a venture capital company called Renewal Partners, whose mission mirrored that of her foundation. It was for social profit, not economic profit, and they have been leaders in Canada in social impact philanthropy. Sometimes, great things have been accomplished by women without money. And there are many examples in Canada, but I will name only one. The late June Callwood, noted author, journalist, founder of multiple charities and organizations to address evident societal needs. A few examples of her legacy: Nellie's, Canada's first women's shelter from abuse; Jessie's, a home to nurture pregnant teen moms; Casey House, a hospice for AIDS victims. I could name many more that she founded. June was an incredible woman and one of my heroes. In the latter decade of the 20th century and into this century, we see the changing landscape for women in philanthropy, and we are seeing the power that comes from their hearts. Women are emerging as philanthropic leaders, and the face of philanthropy, more and more, is the face of women. Ketchum Canada tells us that over the next 10 years, women will acquire an estimated $900 billion. By 2026, they're expected to control close to 48% of financial wealth. It is a proven fact that women are more generous than men, and will donate a higher proportion of their assets to charity, especially to charities that work to alleviate poverty, healthcare, education, and organizations for women and girls. Women are more emotionally engaged in their causes and are driven more by impact on society. As women increasingly generate their own wealth and come into their very own, they will be a force to be reckoned with in shaping the landscape of giving. They are a growing force in philanthropy, and society should take note. So I've characterized women in philanthropy this way. I call it the 5 C's of the way women give. First, they care. Their hearts are engaged first by an evident societal need. Then they make a commitment. They want to do something to address the need. They learn about it, and they act. And then comes the check. It follows the caring and commitment. Then women collaborate, and they do this well. They bond together with like minds and like missions. Lastly, there is continuity, because when women engage, we never let go. So world, take note. Women are emerging as a driving force in addressing societal needs. We care, and we will act.
Good evening. My name is Janice Fukakusa, and I'm passionate about advancing women in business and entrepreneurship. Most of my career has been spent in the banking industry, where I was an advocate for diversity in all aspects of the business. I can tell you it was a hard sell over the years, but times are changing. Corporate leaders are recognizing that the 3 measures of business sustainability, environmental, social, and governance, known as ESG, are an accurate measure of future financial success. The future will belong to companies that embrace ESG practices. And do you know which sector has made the biggest shift to reflect the changing demographics of its market? I may be a bit biased, but I would say it's banking. As immigration rates to Canada rose, the financial services market changed with it. Banks know they have to look and feel like their clients to gain their trust. They also know that 80 to 90% of investment decisions are made by women. So financial institutions have changed, driven by an imperative that is borne out in the results, which is this: gender diversity in business leadership is linked to higher performance. A Harvard study of Fortune 500 companies showed that companies with the highest percentage of female board members reported a 42% greater return on sales and a 53% higher return on equity compared to companies with few or no women on their board. So how do more female board members impact corporate culture? Firstly, diverse boards look more like their customer base. That is really important when women make most of the purchasing decisions. And diverse boards also send a signal to future employees that the development of women and minorities is important, creating a larger talent pool for the companies. And here's the most interesting part for me. Having women on a board changes the dynamic of board discussions, and I have personal experience with that. When I took on the job to chair the inaugural Canada Infrastructure Bank, we had the chance to put together the board from scratch. So we made it 50% female. And what happened? With no history, everyone began their service on the board at the same level. Most importantly, from a female perspective, there was no pre-existing culture that would tend to make a single, newly introduced woman feel intimidated or bullied. I've sat on many other boards, and I see the difference. This brand new board makes decisions that are quicker and more evidence-based than any on which I have served. And here's the best part. With half of the board members being women, I know that it is entirely sustainable and that it will continue to refresh itself in the same form. So we know that gender diversity is a winning strategy for existing businesses, but what about women striking it out on their own, the entrepreneurs? There are obstacles, but also opportunities. According to Ryerson's Diversity Institute, more women start businesses in Canada than in any other country. And as Chancellor of Ryerson, I get to see the next generation of entrepreneurs up close. The future, by the way, looks very bright. The young women I see are dedicated and talented. Mayan Ziv is one of the many young women at Ryerson I admire. She came up with an idea to make it easier for those with disabilities to know which buildings are accessible before they get there. Mayan uses a wheelchair, and she designed a crowdsourcing platform to provide up-to-date information on restaurants, banks, and government buildings that gives details of their accessibility. The platform is called Access Now and is now in 26 countries. The federal government recently invested close to $3 million in Mayan's business, and the sky's the limit. Another example is Jenny Liu, a Ryerson PhD student in psychology. She developed an app that helps anyone, but particularly students, measure how they are coping with everyday challenges. The ability to cope is called resiliency, and Jenny developed a tool to measure it that has gained worldwide attention. The app has thousands of downloads. Young women like Jenny Liu and Mayan Ziv are determined to succeed, but we need more of them. And for everyone here, what can you do to help? 3 words: invest, share, coach. Invest. Consider investing in the businesses of women entrepreneurs. Share. You all have skills that women entrepreneurs need. Consider giving your time to help. And coach. Coach young people who are looking into future careers not to shy away from going into business for themselves. And our institutions are responding. I see firsthand what Ryerson is doing for entrepreneurs, providing support for entrepreneurship and female-led startups. The university's world-leading incubator, the DMZ, runs programs that support female entrepreneurs. Accelerator programs, peer-to-peer gatherings, and quarterly Women in Tech series that brings female entrepreneurs together from across Canada. And these efforts are making an impact. The current industry standard for female-led startups is less than 14%. At DMZ, the number is 25%. We need to get that number higher, but it is progress. Women have showed that we have the tools to succeed. Let's make sure that we provide them with the opportunity and support. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Milica Radisic. I'm a scientist and an engineer. My team and I can do magical things in the lab. We can take your skin or blood cells and turn them into your own little strips of beating heart tissue. We build supportive microstructures for the cells to assemble in using techniques initially developed in the computer chip industry. And then we bring these tissues to life using electricity. And in a magical light transformation, we can literally go from skin to heart or blood to heart, things that were unimaginable just 2 decades ago. And over the years, we've done many useful things with these tissues. For example, we have used them to help us understand what causes heart disease in people who have high blood pressure. And we are currently trying to understand what causes heart disease in a group of patients followed at the Toronto General Hospital who have heart rhythm disorders. And to make these tissues even more useful and more widely available, as a group, we had to learn how to become business people without having any training in business and start a company that is called Tata Biosystem. This company is involved in commercial drug testing for pharma companies. And this enables pharma to test their new drugs in human heart tissues before they're given to the volunteers for the first time in phase 1 clinical studies. And at the same time, these tissues help us decrease the use of animals in research. But the reason I'm here tonight is not to tell you about our science. There is actually a bigger reason, and I'm here to tell you why I became a scientist. So people often ask me, how did you get there? How did you decide to become a scientist to begin with? And when I talk to other women who might be older than me, they usually say, well, I wanted to do it, but there were no positions like that for women in my time. And when I talk to younger women and girls, almost exclusively, they say, oh, science is too hard. How were you able to do it? It's just too hard for me. And the statistics in Canada are not encouraging. And despite significant efforts of the recent decades, women still occupy only about 20% of positions in science, technology, and engineering and math fields, which is often abbreviated by the word STEM. And significant efforts are still being invested to change this. For example, Engineers Canada recently launched the initiative called 30 by 30 in an effort to have 30% women amongst licensed professional engineers by year 2030. And then many people ask, well, when should we start encouraging girls to enter STEM fields? Should it be in high school, in elementary school, or in kindergarten? I want to turn this question around and ask, when should we stop discouraging girls from entering the STEM fields? We literally start discouraging them the moment they're born. And there are still onesies sold for babies by famous children's companies that say smart like daddy or cute like mommy. And this is actually, I downloaded this yesterday. It's free shipping if you make an order. So we are encouraging girls to be cute. And there are many other examples of children's toys and games that sound similar messages. It is at these earliest ages that girls learn that math and science are too hard for them. And it looks like that, unfortunately, from the moment they're born, we are discouraging girls away from the careers in STEM. But actually, the true reason I became a scientist is not because somebody encouraged me with words to pursue science. And it wasn't because I was a part of any special program that promoted STEM education amongst girls, although I commend and fully support such programs. It was actually just because of the beauty and the magic of the natural world around us. As a young child of 4 or 5, I was mesmerized, just like many of us, by the night sky and the multitude of stars you can see in it. And I thought that I would surely become an astrophysicist when I grow up. And then a simple toy like a kaleidoscope was also magical. The way the light is breaking, bursting in color. And I wanted to know where are the stars coming from and what causes the light to break in a kaleidoscope to create these images that I can see but I cannot touch. Then one day I got a hold of a microscope and I saw that there was an equally amazing world to be explored, but it was just very, very small. And it is truly to this day that I experience the same excitement every time I look through the microscope to see our beating heart tissues. And it is with this same childish curiosity that I'm still mesmerized by beautiful colored images of our cells. It's almost like the night sky, but these are actually real heart cells that we grow in the lab. And it is the exploration of the beauty and magic of the natural world around us that led me to seek STEM programs in both high school and university. My message today is that it is time for us as a society to validate every girl's excitement about uncovering the beauty and the mystery of the natural world around us. And speaking to all girls and women in this theater and all around the country, I want to make one thing clear. You are beautiful, and the world around you is also beautiful, and at the same time mysterious. And it is yours to be explored, and you are the perfect person to lead this exploration. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Zanana Akande, and so frequently I'm asked, how did you get here by doing something so ordinary as being a school teacher? And I'm here to tell you that the words that set you free can tie you up in knots. It's always surprising to hear myself described as coming from humble beginnings. I know what the words mean. It means my family was poor. Yet growing up, we never described ourselves as poor. Poor was not having any plans or any ambitions or not having high expectations. And we had all of that. We just didn't have any money. I was certain that hard work would cure that. Yet growing up in the 40s and 50s, the limitations to accessible work and financial reward were complicated by my gender and my race. Even when you fought past the factory and the office and back into the school, rare was the opportunity to lead the show, even at the school level. Women were there in the schools, often in the majority, but rarely in leadership. Having tried fitting in, and even pretending that leadership and greater responsibilities were things that you wanted only until you married, or unless you didn't. Disgruntled and impatient, I joined the ranks of the less acquiescent, more demanding women, pushing for our rights and greater inclusion in leadership. You know the names of some of the most publicized women in this battle: Betty Friedan and Laura Sabia, Margaret Sloan and Gloria Steinem. But there were also hundreds of women from the Federation of Women Teachers in Ontario, and from many, many other professions and climes of life. We reasoned, we debated, we argued aloud and in print. We were even known to have cajoled, but rarely, and we were always right, or at least righteous. Practiced in the art of verbal opposition, Black women numbered among those who fought for women's advancement and inclusion in leadership. I was comfortable in that struggle. The tactic was familiar, aggressive, without pause or intermission. The language was assertive, but also familiar and clear, very clear. It was the language of my community. Gloria Steinem has publicly stated often that she learned how to advocate for women's rights from Black women who were experienced in advocating for racial equality in many community situations. It was interesting to note, and somewhat encouraging, that we had honed those skills out of necessity and because of our circumstances, somewhat inadvertently. Yet the words and the delivery held meaning for all women involved in the movement, regardless of their race. The terms and language of the movement became widespread. Research was abundant and used well to hammer home obvious conclusions and eventual acceptance of women's demands. Women had pulled together and collectively made real gains, important changes, such that eventually, but slowly, women were moved into leadership roles. It's quite a task getting this. Eventually, some women were well positioned to effect the occupational promotion of many of their sisters, to aid in their upward mobility, to increase their financial independence, and raise their status. Success. At last the sisterhood was powerful, but there the eruption began, and the movement became divided by class, by race, and by fit, as in not the right fit. Haunted by the rhetorical question, very familiar in our community, ain't I a woman? But undaunted by our general omission, Black women relaunched the demand for equal rights as part of the Black agenda. And as soon an extension took over the goals of the movement and made it our movement. The movement of women working in a multitude of roles that came from everywhere. We encourage women from factories to hospitals, from banks, from hairdressing salons, to move into our movement. And knowing that sometimes, sometimes accepting their job limitations, some of them were so embarrassed to be there that they in fact made us all promise not to share their presence with others. We knew that many of them had left school in the middle of high school. Some of them had graduated and went to work in commercial roles. Others felt that they did not have those skills, and so they took hairdressing courses. We knew that few of them had the opportunity to go to university, and we knew that bringing them all together was a bit scary, but bring them together we did. It was a movement that was so accepting that they, in fact, began to feel comfortable. Some of them asked for support in learning the things that they needed to know to move further into more responsible jobs. As a matter of fact, my husband ended up being the math tutor, and I thought that some of the women took greater interest in him than their tutoring, but we won't. we postponed worrying about that until they moved forward. We also had to accept the fact that we were not teachers, that we, in fact, were women supporting other women. And so when people shared with you what they did not know, you had to fight that feeling that I'll immediately tell them what to do or I'll give them classes, because some of us who were teachers were very accustomed to doing that. What a movement it was. And it was built on a slogan. The slogan was, "One step higher with money." One step higher with money. And some of those women had retired today. They've retired from the positions that they earned through their work. They retired, some of them as union leaders. One of them started a series of hairdressing shops where she hired some of the other women who also weren't good at math. I often wonder about the financial endings in that situation. Some of them moved into offices, and it was, for them, one step higher because they never anticipated they'd be there. But Some of them became, you guessed it, school principals and supervisory officers, and they're here tonight to tell you, yes, indeed, the words that set you free can tie you up in knots, but you must redefine them in order to free yourself. Thank you.
I'm not really going to talk off a piece of paper, but I wanted to feel like I belonged with everybody, so I just kind of brought one up and thought, you know, this is what I should do right off the bat. So I'm Brenda Andress, and I am the founder and president of SheIS and the former commissioner of the Canadian Women's Hockey League. And I want to basically talk to you and challenge you today on what I believe is needed to advance women in sports. About 2.5 years ago, I was sitting in my office, still at the time the commissioner of the Canadian Women's Hockey League. And at that time, a ton of people were marching because of the political happenings across the border, and many things even within our own country with laws and different policies that were being set, and people were gathering and marching. And a lot of my friends would call me up and they said, "Hey, Brenda, are you going to march?" And I went, "Nope, not going to march." And they said, "What are you talking about? You march all the time, like you're a feminist." And I said, "Nope, not going to march." I said, because, you know, at my age, we've marched so many times and nobody takes action after marching. We do the march, we do what we say, we have great speeches, and then we as individuals don't take action. So what I wanted to do was try to create something from a very positive place. You take a look at sports. Sports is the universal language of the world. It's the most products sold across the world. And yet for us as women, what we were hearing at the age of 13, we were dropping out of sports. Why? Because there was no career for us. Media only covered us 4%. No funds to create the professional league. It was all based around negativity. And I wanted to create something based on positivity. I wanted to gather the women and men together to make a difference. But the first thing I was going to do when I started SheIS is to actually tell the truth. I was going to say that it's not the media's fault, it's not the sponsor's fault, it's your fault. It is your fault because you, the fan, did not show up. You, the fan, did not buy the ticket. You, the fan, did not turn on digital or linear to watch us, to watch the other women in sports. So SheIS was then created to say something very simple. From this moment on, we're not going to talk about the 4% in a negative way. We're going to talk about the 4% in the way that we as a fan can change it from 4% to 8%. So that we can put positive stories to our 13-year-old woman who knows that she can grow up and be a professional sport athlete and be paid for being that athlete. We wanted to make the difference. My first phone call was to some friends of mine who were commissioners in the other leagues, and we historically created, for the first time ever, 13 commissioners, every single women's professional sports commissioner, together on one collective, working together and not in silos for the very first time. Now, I can only tell you that there's no way that 13 men's professional leagues can get together and work in the same room. Never mind anything else along those lines. So SheIS was created specifically to connect and mobilize fans into creating growth for women's professional leagues, and that was done by what we call the SheIS Nation. We're sweeping the country with a positive message. And where did I come up with that? It came up actually from when, quite a few years ago, I received a phone call from the YWCA. And it was Heather who left a message on my machine and said something like, "Hey, Brenda, call us. This is the Toronto YWCA, and, I want to talk to you." And the first thing I said was, I didn't apply to the YWCA. Like, why is she calling me? And she called again, and she said, "Brenda, you won the Women of Distinction for your work with the Canadian Women's Hockey League." And I was like, wow, that is such a huge honor. And when you get that honor, you get to make a 3-minute speech, not even a 7-minute one. They give you 3, right, and say, make it work. And of course, my name being Andress, I go first. And in that particular year, so I walk up to the stage, and in my mind, I go, I got 3 minutes, and I want to make an impact. But more importantly, I want to say something that's going to change my life. Because again, I go back to the person who can make a difference or a change in anything is me and you. And so I walked up to the podium, and man, I've got to tell you, this is one time I spoke that I was nervous because I knew what I was about to say could be controversial, and yet I knew it had to say it because it's what I truly believed. So I walked up to the stage, and at that particular time, I said, thank you so much for this wonderful award from the Women of Distinction, and I just want to tell you that I deserve it, and I'm worthy of it. And for a brief moment, 1,000 women in the same room was quiet. And I was like, oh my gosh. And then I specifically said why, because I think as women, we don't believe that we're worthy and deserving of a lot of things in our lives, in jobs, in relationships, and in the opportunity to take change. And tonight I want to add one more to that list. I want to tell you that I belong. After that award, I grew in the fact of believing that I belonged, and then I came to say that with SheIS, that we belong. And the difficult for us with women in sports is that we don't believe we belong. We don't believe we belong in the dressing room. We don't believe we belong in the boardroom. We don't believe we belong as owners. We don't believe that we belong. And in order to belong, you have to take action. You have to believe that. I can tell you this, when I was as the commissioner, and even where I am right now, if a job goes up for posting, if a man has 30% of the skills, he'll apply. If a woman has 99, she won't. Right? She won't apply. And then what happens is that if she gets the job, she gets in that boardroom, and she still doesn't believe she belongs. And then you know what happens after that? We as women get in the boardroom, and then we don't believe the other women belong. And it's like a vicious cycle. So SheIS, when we put it together, we took it and we said, we're going to be positive. We're going to speak about the fact that we all belong. And my message to you is very simple. You are the person that can make the difference in advancing women, not just in sports, but in anything. But it takes action. You cannot get on your social media and go, me too, I believe in it. Yes, I sponsor it. Yes, I go and watch it. Doesn't work. You have to take action to make change in this world. You have to know that you are worthy, you're deserving, and you belong, and then take action to make sure that happens. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Connie Walker. For the last few years, I've spent a significant amount of time talking about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. The last 2 seasons of our podcast, Missing and Murdered, focused on the unsolved cases of Alberta Williams and Cleo Samaginis. And all of the stories we've told over the last few years, we tried to tell with great care and with empathy. But today, I want to tell you about the first woman who made me aware of not only the violence that Indigenous women face in Canada, but also issues in the media when covering these stories. I was 16 years old in grade 12, living on reserve in Treaty 4 territory in southern Saskatchewan, and going to school in Balcarres, a nearby small town, when I first heard about Pamela George. Pamela George was a young Saulteaux woman, a single mother of 2, a daughter, a sister. She was also from the Sakamay First Nation, not far from where I grew up. She lived in Regina with her young children, and she was killed in 1995. But the 2 men who were charged with her murder did not go on trial until late the next year. Now, I wasn't a teenager who paid much attention to the news, but I knew about Pamela George. It was a high-profile trial that dominated the headlines in Saskatchewan and even made national news. And as a young First Nations woman who grew up in Saskatchewan, I was keenly aware of the way Pamela was spoken about in the media and how it differed from the way the two white men who were charged in her death were described. Now, here's part of a transcript from a national newscast on December 19th, 1996. You'll have to pretend I'm Peter Mansbridge right now. In Regina, a jury is deciding the fate of two young men charged with the murder of a young woman. It's a case a lot of people are watching closely. The CBC's Eric Sorensen tells us why. The accused are young and clean-cut. Steve Comerfield, the basketball star. Alex Ternowetsky, a hockey standout. They come from middle-class families. The victim was Aboriginal and a prostitute. The two men admit they were cruising Regina streets one night last year looking for a hooker in this area known for prostitutes. They admitted picking up Pamela George, taking her to a remote roadside, beating her, and leaving her behind. This was in January. Her body was found the next morning by police. In court, a friend of the accused testified that Comerfield had told him, "We drove around, quote, we drove around, got drunk, and killed this chick." And that Ternowetsky told him, "She deserved it. She was Indian." Steve Comerfield, the basketball star, and Alex Ternowetsky, the hockey standout, were acquitted of first-degree murder in Pamela's death and sentenced to manslaughter. At the time, I remember wondering if there were any First Nations journalists in the newsrooms that were covering that trial. And it was the first time that I thought about becoming a journalist. I wanted to help people better understand our people and our communities, to create space so that people could have empathy for Pamela, a young single mother who struggled and occasionally worked in the sex trade to help pay the bills. Ternowetsky and Comerfield both served around 4 years of jail time and were released on bail around the time I got my first job in a newsroom. I was excited about the impact I could have in my future in journalism, but I quickly realized that having just one voice might not be enough. Back then, it seemed the only time Indigenous stories made the news was when there was a crisis or a conflict. That summer, I was an intern, and the fisheries dispute on the East Coast between the Mi'kmaq people and the non-Indigenous fishermen in Burnt Church, New Brunswick, was making national headlines. My job as an intern was to chase guests for a national morning show. I had booked the chief of the Indian Brook First Nation to come on the show the following Monday to talk about the latest development in the dispute. I was pretty green at that point and frankly not a very good chase producer. But I remember my senior producer at the time grilling me about the details. "Did I tell him where to go?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "It was an early morning show, so did I double check with the time?" "Yes," I said. "He knows." And then she said to me, "Because you know those Indians, they'll go out drinking all weekend and they won't show up on a Monday morning." I remember just looking around to see if anyone else had heard what she had said, but it was a really busy newsroom and no one was paying attention to our conversation. And so I didn't know what to say or what to do, so I didn't do anything. I was an intern. What could I say, I thought. A few years later, I was working in a national news program based in Toronto. A young girl, a young woman who I knew from back home in Saskatchewan had gone missing. This was before social media, before Facebook. Her family had actually sent out an email chain with her picture, asking people to forward it to all of their contacts. Her name was Amber Redman. I knew her because I coached her in volleyball when I was in university. She was the same age as my sister. That same summer, another young woman went missing in Toronto. Her name was Alicia Ross. Amber and Alicia went missing within 1 month of each other in the summer of 2005. And I remember thinking there were so many similarities between them. They were both young and beautiful. They both had bright futures ahead of them. And they both had families who were desperate for any information about their disappearance. But there were some key differences. Alicia was white and blonde. Her disappearance was covered in the national newspapers and national newscasts. And Amber's disappearance barely got any local coverage. She was Indigenous. I wanted to pitch a story that compared and contrasted the attention that these two cases got in the media, and at the time I worked for a program whose mandate it was to examine the role of media, so I thought my story would be a perfect fit. And I went to pitch to my boss. But before I could really begin, she put up her hand and said, "This isn't another poor Indian story, is it?" As I grew more experienced, my voice grew stronger, and 10 years later, I was part of a unit at CBC dedicated to helping tell stories about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, which led to the creation of our podcast, Missing and Murdered. Finally, I had the time and space and resources to be able to tell stories about the violence that Indigenous women and girls face in Canada in a way that could address the harmful stereotypes that I'd encountered in my entire career. Space to explore the context, to show how these stories are connected back to our shared history that not enough people are aware of. As journalists and as consumers of journalism, we need to realize how Indigenous people have been misrepresented and underrepresented in mainstream media for decades. Things are changing, yes, but there are still so many widely held stereotypes and harmful tropes that we need to confront. I think of Pamela George. What could we have better understood about her story if we had looked beyond her being a sex worker, if we had approached her story with empathy? In the last season of Missing and Murdered, Finding Cleo, we used the central mystery of Cleo's story to help people understand the 60s scoop, the overrepresentation of Indigenous kids in care, the legacy of residential schools, because we knew that part of understanding Cleo's story would be understanding her mother, Lillian's story. Lillian was a woman who had all 6 of her children taken by child welfare authorities, a woman who was also taken away from her family and community as a child and sent to a residential school. Lillian struggled with addiction, she struggled with the trauma that she experienced, and she struggled to take care of her children. And when we started the podcast, we knew that to do justice to Cleo's story and to her mother's story, we needed to create space for people to have empathy for Lillian, to help people fully understand her story. And by using the popularity of podcasts and the true crime genre, we were able to reach people who didn't even know that they were interested in Indigenous issues, people who came for the mystery but stayed to learn about Canadian history. People who went on to have empathy for Cleo and for Lillian, and people who, if they heard Pamela's story now, would demand the same for her. Thank you.
Seven remarkable talkers. Thank you to all of you, to Sally Armstrong. So, thank you to Sally Armstrong, Margaret McCain, Janice Fukakusa, Milica, Radisic, Zanana Akande, Brenda Andress, and Connie Walker. And thank you again to the YWCA Toronto and Ryerson University. Now I'm going to invite our talkers to get up and head to the reception. And while they do that, I'm going to tell you about a few more things about the Walrus. So talkers, go that way. Everybody else stay here. And if you enjoyed tonight's event, you can watch past videos of the Walrus Talks. There are more than 850 7-minute talkers on our YouTube channel. To further support these important Canadian conversations, please consider subscribing to the Walrus. It's a magazine that you can have only for tonight. A full year subscription is just $25. Fake news is cheap to make, and fact-based journalism is expensive. One investigative feature can cost more than $30,000. At the Walrus, all of our journalism is fact-checked by live humans, and we don't think this should be a luxury. It's a necessity. It's how it should work. So please consider joining our community of more than 2,000 donors across this country who support independent, fact-based journalism. Even a small gift can make a big impact. Every single dollar donated will be doubled by 2 generous supporters, Francis and Tim Price. And only tonight, Sarah Scott of Barlow Books, I hope you're out there somewhere, Sarah, has stepped forward to triple the first $5,000 donated. Yes. So your $10 automatically becomes $30 invested in fact-based journalism tonight. So please make a donation. Please visit thewalrus.ca/donate or the merchandise table during the reception. The Walrus team would love to meet you. Thank you again to the YWCA Toronto, Ryerson University, and everyone here for your incredible work and support tonight. The 2020 Women of Distinction Awards will take place on May 28th, and I hope you will join YWCA Toronto for an evening of celebrating women's achievements. Thank you also to our national partners, Inspire, Labatt Breweries of Canada, Air Canada, and Shaw, for being with us across the country. Please join us at the reception, where there is food and there is drink, and if you are there, there will be good conversation. And remember, we are not the walrus, you are the walrus. Thank you for coming. Enjoy yourselves.